Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It is Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan. Geoff Mosher back home. Adam Caplan from Indianapolis, live in the flesh. You're a lucky man. A lucky luck. No minus 10-degree wind chill.
No,
crazy snow coming in sideways. It's actually remember last year. I remember the day I flew in. It was 65 degrees, and we had a thunder and lightning storm. And then the next morning it was 28 degrees. But you seem to have steady weather over there.
Yeah, it looks good. I know back home it's good, which is great. I'm glad. I know people, because we've been sick and tired of being shut-ins with the weather being so cold. A very cold winter. No snow, or next to no snow as usual, for several years. But yeah, so in Indy, the weather it's somewhat like Philly. Typically, when we get here, it's rainy, a little snowy sometimes. Could be anywhere from single digits to, as you mentioned, 50s or 60s. On Tuesday, it got up to 60. It poured. I got here Monday night. It poured overnight, apparently, because, man, it was really wet on the sidewalk. But it was a nice day. And I just remember, I don't know when your first combine was. My first was in 2002. And this is when the workouts were in the old RCA Dome, man. And, boy, the information was easy to get, because they wouldn't put the NFL was really big on not letting the numbers out. Like they're hiding it like it was state secrets. Now everyone gets them.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you did this when you were working at Comcast Sports Center or whatever outlet you were with, but I would wait till they would come out of the tunnel, because there was no security. Nothing was really secured back then. You'd wait till they came out of the tunnel, out of the RCA Dome. The convention center was connected to the RCA Dome. And if you see a GM or a personnel guy or a scout, hey, what did so-and-so run? Do you know? And because we were dying for the information, I would ask anyone.
Right.
It wasn't bad.
Right. No, you're right. It's different now, but it is still the same where even with Lucas Oil Stadium, I like to you've seen me, I like to park myself right at the sort of exit to the stadium and entrance to the mall, convention center, all those, because everybody has to go through there. So it's a great way to catch up with people that you're looking to catch up with. And it's fine. Like if you have a media pass, you're allowed to be there. If you're a fan, you can't. But it is a good way to catch up with a lot of people, because everybody at some point, you just don't know when, right? So you just sit there and it's like a subway station, and you watch people come in and out and in and out. But in this case, you're just hoping that you run into some people that you know, or you need to know, or you want to know. I'm just glad the agent meeting thing doesn't take up most of the day like it used to, when they also used to meet in the Sagamore
Actually,
room.
I don't think they do it. I think
they don't do it at all. Yeah,
I think they do it virtually. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's on my agenda to see if if they're going to do it locally anymore. I think the last 2 years they weren't doing it; they were doing it virtually.
Right.
But yeah, it's this intercrosses with free agency. So a lot of GMs meet in their hotel room. Sometimes they meet for coffee somewhere. They're always trying to find a private spot where they're not going to be seen. It's actually funny, because you asked me on the other show, had I ever seen any of these meetings? Yeah, I mean, we talked about Steak and Shake. I saw one at Starbucks one year. I saw the Cowboys. I didn't mention this part. I remember. No, you asked about the napkin. Yeah, it was the Cowboys. I saw the Cowboys exchanging something on, I don't know what the numbers were. Of course, this is years ago. Exchanging something on a napkin. I thought that was common, because I walked right by them, talking to an agent. So you never know. You never know what's going to happen.
Right.
But it's fun. It's fun, but it's more. It's obviously more for scouting. And the other thing I'll add before we get started is I talked to a couple coaching staffs through text. A lot of guys are not coming. They're not.
Really?
Some are because it's a new staff. And some are veteran staff where they think they can get more work. And obviously the scouts have to be here, but the coaches are not coming.
Now, you and I both noticed this at the Senior Bowl. It wasn't just an Eagles thing. The Eagles sent far fewer staff members to the Senior Bowl than ever before. But I thought in general, NFL league-wide attendance or scout, like when I say every team's represented. But what I'm saying is I didn't see as many head coaches. I didn't see as many GMs, even maybe some directors of scouting that you would ordinarily see weren't there. So I wonder what's behind that. I think, I know the Rams are kind of infamous for believing that you don't need to have everybody from your janitor to your your secretary at the combine or at the Senior Bowl. So maybe some teams are, especially ones that play deeper into the playoffs, scaling back on having all full hands on deck at these events.
Yeah, we'll see from if over a series of years, does this, could you point, like if a team struggles with the draft, it's because they didn't spend enough time here in Indy? Probably you're not going to be able to know that if that had any impact.
Right.
But it is interesting. Sometimes I know some scouting departments feel like they might be overspending in a certain way. Maybe they could use their resources better.
Mm-hmm.
I know from one of the new staffs around the league that they're not coming here to the combine. They're going to be their GM said, "I want you guys more pro days. We'll take care of. We need more eyes at the pro days because we need you to interview, get in front of people more." So again, every team is different.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the Eagles didn't do something different. They did something that they seemingly always do at the NFL Combine. They have their head coach and their GM speak at the podium on the first day, and they get it out of the way. Both Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni stood at the podiums and did their media sessions. In fact, the only thing that was different and somewhat funny was that Howie Roseman probably took a few extra questions more than he normally does, because I heard him say something like, "Sorry to Bob," because, Bob Lang gives the 2 questions and Howie allowed a few extras. Although I think one of the last questions was, "Has your forehead healed since the parade?"
Look clean. By the way, I did look for that just to see, because obviously it happened. And so I'm like, yeah, it looks like it didn't happen. It looks like it, honestly, unless he had something cosmetic done, it looks like it was, I don't think he was wearing makeup. Didn't look like he was wearing makeup. So it looks like it healed in 2 weeks.
He doesn't want to hide that. He wants to wear that thing like a merit badge. He probably is mad that it's off of his that it can't be seen anymore.
I should have said that to him. Hey, you know what? Hey, Howie, you know what Geoff Mosher said?
Go ahead. He's the one who said, "Hey, I bleed for the city." So
he trademarked it. Didn't he trademark it? Didn't I see that?
I think he might have.
Yeah, I think it's out there somewhere. But yeah, so Howie and Nick spoke. We'll go in. We're gonna go inside their comments and see if there's the hard takeaways. Yeah, I have a couple things. I know some people think that he's a waste of time. I thought there was some good stuff. I thought Howie did a really good job. I thought the questions were good for Howie. I thought he went into a little deeper. I could see he wears a chip on his shoulder about certain questions. And I know Nick Sirianni had a major chip on his shoulder about the tush push. He was not happy because Nick, now that they're not in season, he's more willing to be upfront about stuff. And he is not happy about, he's insulted, to use his words. We'll get into that and a couple other things this week as we continue.
All right. I can't wait to do it. This is part of the year that I love. We sort of, go inside with what we know, but we also read through some tea leaves. And Adam, nobody has to read through the tea leaves of what you're thinking early on the draft. Your full entire mock draft is out. Part 3 came out on Tuesday, picks 22 to 32, NFL first round mock draft. So you got the Eagles in there. I loved your Eagles pick. That was a really good one. And
that kid out
about it.
Yeah, I won't give it away if you haven't heard it. So it's an audio video mock draft. So you can go and I go over the first 22, and I don't waste any time. I get right into it. 22-32, as you said, the Eagles. What's funny is the one that I have for the Chiefs, I'm sure the Eagles would like to have. And it's a school that they've gotten to know the last year. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I should say it's a school that they knew from certain people on their coaching staff. I just kind of gave it away a little bit if you really follow the draft. But for the Eagles, it's an interesting one because someone asked me on YouTube, you'll see my comment on the comments. I thought the guy knew it. Because it was the other pick that I was going to make was a kid who's going to go in the top 40, potentially late in the first round for a position, for a need for the Eagles. There's no question about it. It's a current and future need because the draft is always about both. It's not just current. You're not drafting for 1 year. As I've said for 8 years now, you're drafting for the future in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years. So it's fascinating to see kind of what happens with the Eagles and whether they stay there. Do they trade the pick? How aggressive they're going to be in free agency? Are they making trades? Are they trading away future picks during free agency to get veteran edge rushers or corners? Who knows?
Right.
We're learning a lot, by the way. What they do with free agency will set up the draft. There's no question about that.
And I'm going to be a man for the people, Adam, for our great listeners, because just in case they weren't able to catch all 3 or any of the 3 and instead of making them go back and try to find the one that they missed, I'm going to fuse all 3 of your segments together by the end of the week and create one long Adam Caplan's entire first round.
About an hour. I get right to it, man. I don't, I don't want to keep people. Like the one thing Geoff and I have learned through a ton doing this business venture, this work of art, so to speak, of Inside the Birds is that we know people, yes, they love the storytelling, but they like us to get to it. So I get right. Each one is like, I can think one 17 minutes. One of these shows 17 minutes.
Yeah, no, you really just dive right into it. I love it.
Yeah. So you could fuse them all together. Yeah. You could probably get it done in an hour. So, and then before we move on and get started, I love that show, which has had a huge number, that we went inside the scouting combine and the value of everything we've learned and everyone we've talked with.
Mm-hmm.
And then Andrew DeCecco dropped his small school prospects audio version of kind of some guys to keep an eye on. Andrew's great at discovering those guys, so check that audio out.
Yeah, and think about how many contributors the Eagles have had from the quote-unquote smaller schools over the last year. Just 2 alone last year with the first-round pick Quinyon Mitchell and the third-round pick Jalix Hunt, who came from a school that I guarantee you most fans, football fans, not just Eagles fans, had never heard of, with Houston Christian, right? So I guarantee you that was like, people were like, where the heck is that? Other than knowing that it was in Houston, Texas.
Right, and they changed the name. And don't forget about Milton Williams in 2021 out of Louisiana Tech, which was most likely known for Karl Malone, I believe, who went to Louisiana Tech, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he did go to Louisiana Tech. That's a good
right, and that's why I was known. It's like, I'm sure we must have said that in 2021. But yeah, so check those small school prospects out with Andrew's show.
Great job by Andrew. All right, so let's go inside Howie Roseman's press conference and make something of what he said. Now, I thought it was really interesting that he was asked about. This is the second year in a row, by the way, that he's been asked this question, and it had a slightly different tone because a couple of years ago, I think he was asked about having a lot of Georgia players at a time where it didn't seem like they were making their impact the way they did this year, with Jalen Carter exploding and to becoming the NFL's best defensive lineman. Nakobe Dean really finally having his first year. I know he got hurt, but he really was having a fine year as a starter. Obviously, Nolan Smith contributing this year more so than he did as a rookie. Time. And Keely Ringo being a backup corner, which is ordinarily an important job. It's just that he didn't, get on the field very much, but he did play on special teams, and he played really well on special teams. So, Adam, he was asked about, going fishing in the Georgia pond over and over, and all the, the benefits that he's had. And it's an interesting question for this organization in particular, because for so long they did not go fishing in the Alabama and the Georgia and the SEC.
And why though? I wish. I mean, Howie, if has anyone ever asked him why? Why did you ignore Alabama and Georgia for, I don't know, decades, but a number of years? It was really hard, and then hard to understand. And then they started doing it. They started going to those schools. You would think it would be obvious, but maybe that was part of why Howie wasn't doing great in the draft. But now he's kicking absolute ass. And he's not just those schools. He's hit on a number of players. It's just that's the other thing, and it wouldn't be appropriate probably for this one. But I loved, other than the football character, which I know has clearly been, as we understand it, a big point of emphasis. What the turnaround in drafts? Why is he being able to do it the last 4 years, including last year, the 24 one, which looks like it's off to a great start? And we could also add Lewis Seen, also from Georgia, who's on the roster now.
Right.
So,
don't you feel like the Eagles have improved their process because they're less married to one way or extremes? Meaning, like, do they place a high emphasis on analytics or athletic testing? Yes, they do. Does that stop them from drafting a guy like Landon Dickerson in the second round, who doesn't rip it up from an athletic testing standpoint and had years of knee injuries, right, and other injuries, but he's a top 30, top 20 talent, some people regarded him as, who's available in the second round? I feel like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, whether it's medical or whether it's this or that, testing, who knows, but they went and just got an awesome first-round prospect in the second round there because they valued the production and the player over anything else there.
Well, and think about with Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. I know they had the insight because Jason Candle who's their head coach, was Sirianni's former teammate and roommate at Mount Union. But the bottom line is they went by the tape. They liked the measurables. They loved the football character, the smarts, the toughness. We talked about his combine workout, lifting, what was it, 20? Was it 20 reps? 225, something like that?
It was 20, 20 reps of 225.
Which is crazy, like for a cornerback.
Mm-hmm.
So they were. This was not a top five. This was not a big time school,
right?
Lower mid major, and kind of the Toledo Rockets at some points, last 30 years, they were decent at hoops. But anyway, but on your point, they're not married to any program anymore, but they started hitting Georgia and Alabama in a big way, particularly Georgia. And it's really paid off. And Iowa, of course, and some other schools. But I'm not – something had Howie turn. Maybe he just said, you know what, we got to stop this. We got to go to these big-time schools, and obviously it's paid off big time.
But also to your point, like they didn't – again, they're not so extremes where they thought, we can't take this kid from Toledo. We can't fish in the MAC pond when we're done so well fishing in the SEC pond, right? They didn't go with Terrion Arnold. They didn't go with Nate Wiggins, right? They went with the Toledo guy, and they hit big time.
I see what you mean at that position over those guys.
Doing it one way all the time, which is, I think,
right. That's a great point. I get what you speak. I wasn't thinking of it that way, but that's even a more salient point than anything we're talking about. Is that you could look at the position. You could go, okay, Terrion Arnold, big time player. You could go through all the corners. Well, they took the guy at the smaller school, who also, by the way, didn't play press coverage. Mm-hmm. And they still got it right to this point. It looks like Quignon's on his way to being a terrific football player. Had a great rookie season. So yeah, and that was some of the questions at the press conference. There were a couple of philosophical questions, and that's what I meant about Howie talking about, because I could see he got on his crawl a little bit about, they won't spend at certain positions. Obviously, running back, they got knocked at linebacker. If they get Zach Bond back, they're going to pay big time for it. And I know they want him back. He wants to be back, is understanding. I'm sure they'll work on that this week. He's their player, so they could absolutely talk to the agency and see if they could start working on it and figure out where the numbers are going to go. But it's interesting the way that Howie's built this roster. It's not one school. It's not one position of that school. It's just, hey, it's on our data. It's on what we like. It's our football character. And that's why he set this thing up for the future. As he talked about, he didn't want to talk about the 17 team, but we know it. This team is way younger than that 17 team.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, Adam, because, last year at the end of 2024, they have this collapse, and there are a lot of aging players on the roster. Now, some of them are still good. Fletcher Cox was a good player. Jason Kelsey was a good player, but they still did. I mean, especially in the secondary, they were long in the tooth. And Howie stood up at the podium last year, and he said, we're going to have to play young players and develop them because we drafted them. And not everybody loved that idea because they weren't convinced that some of these young players were going to be good enough, because everybody who roots for the team is thinking, well, but are you going to be a Super Bowl contender again? And I got to be honest with you. I think Howie felt, if we were to shoot him up with truth serum, he probably felt pretty good about the Eagles going into the year, but I don't know if he saw the team that was going to thrash the heck out of the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, because the defense was so young and there were so many question marks. Yes, he brought in Vic Fangio, so I'm sure he assumed there would be a steady and incremental level of development that you would see, but I don't know that he saw him having the number one defense. But fast forward a year later, the byproduct of that is that you can now feel pretty good about going into next year because you had so many young, good players develop.
Sure. If you look at DeJean's well ahead of schedule, Quinyon Mitchell well ahead of schedule, Reed Blankenship's already established himself as a undercover, really good football player. Like no one outside the Eagles talks about him. Late on, he's number 32, right? Undrafted free agent 22. He's due for a contract extension. The Eagles need to take care of him. He's a really good football player. Gardner Johnson revived his career. He's only 27. Like this is, Greg thought he was 29. And Cosell thought he was much older because he seems like he's been in the league forever. He doesn't turn 28 until December. How is that even possible? This will be his 19, 21, 23, 25. Seventh year. What was he, 19? They're young. You mentioned Dickerson. We'll see if Tyler Steen is going to be starting at right guard. Right. Cam Jurgens is a young football player. A.J. Brown, by the way, A.J. Brown he turns 28, still relatively young, in June. Skinny Batman's a really young football player. They're Saquon. Okay, Saquon is 28. It's not like he's 30. It's not like he's. They do have Lane Johnson. Okay, they have an older guy. Jordan Mailata is another. This is another one where now he turns 28 in March. They're really young. Yeah, the win, as Howie said in his press conference, the window's clearly open. It's going to be open for a long time. There's no look. He tried to run it back, which I don't think it was a mistake in 2018 because you're going to get some of those players back who were hurt the previous season. It just didn't work out. But no, they're
saying I thought the 2018 opening day or week 1 roster was as good, if not better, than the 2017 team. They just had a lot more injuries, and there was not the level of player development that I think we thought we would see under Doug because they won so early, and some guys did really step up and play well, like a Nelson Aguilar really changed his career under Doug. But from offense to defense, we didn't see it. We saw some regression, and then the injuries really killed them in 18.
Yeah, and once the true regression was in 19, but remember he had the back problem in 2018, the back fracture.
Yeah.
So you have that issue. And what's interesting before we move on to the next point on this stuff is that remember Sirianni, not that he wasn't aligned with Roseman, but Nick made it really clear they're going to play because they were trying to win. They're going to play their best players. Well, it just so happened their best players all of a sudden became younger, much younger. You don't know that sometimes. You draft them to be that. You don't know until they have to play. There's that saying in coaching, you don't know until you get there. They were hopeful, Quinyon Mitchell and particularly DeJean because he started late because that one you really didn't know as a rookie where he'd be. So the coaching matters, man. Coaching for people have heard us now for 8 years, and some people thought it was annoying when we kept saying how much coaching matters, and some people said we were wrong. We were overrating it. I don't think we were wrong. In fact, I know we were right. And some of those people have told us in the comments, over the last 6 months that, you guys got it right. You guys got it right. But it's just because guys can't be coached. They can't coach themselves. Like they don't coaches don't roll the ball out there and say, hey guys, you take care of, you clearly know what you're doing. You went to Alabama. You don't need us to coach you. It's like Tom Brady would never have been great without coaching. Believe it or not, he actually needed coaching.
Absolutely. 100%. One other thing, not one other thing, but another thing Howie was asked about was his process of that they've had for the longest time of signing guys to extensions at the end of their third year. It used to be at the end of the second year. Then the league said, stop doing that. You're not allowed to do it anymore. So now
banner.
It's year. Right. There's no banner rule. Which you and I always believe is the smartest thing to do because it saves you money in the long run. It allows a guy to sign early before he gets closer to free agency and his number gets way up there. And I know some fans still hate when they do it because sometimes they'll do it for a player who hasn't exactly reached the floor yet. And you get worried. Like when they did it with Carson Wentz, they thought it was a bad idea. And even though it didn't work out, to me, the process wasn't bad. And it showed with Jalen Hurts. The process wasn't bad. And you've had him on a manageable cap number for the first 2 years of that extension, right? And just won the Super Bowl because of it. So he was asked about that. And that, to me, that's a process that is as much about why the Eagles are successful as it is, drafting offensive and defensive linemen, cap, the option bonuses. I think that's as much part of the success to what they do as anything.
Yeah, I wanted to do it, and I may do it. If there are only a couple of GMs left, I wanted to ask Adam Peters the GM of the Commanders, because sometimes I wanted to ask Peters. I'm sorry,
the GM of the who?
Oh, the Commandos.
Oh, okay, that's what I thought. All right.
Oh, you want me to go back to?
You said Commanders, I thought, but there's no.
I know it's rare that I do that. Right. No, but I wanted to ask him specifically because since they're the same division, he's a new GM.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he would answer because sometimes they don't like these type of questions, but I think it's very fair because Howie would probably answer. In fact, he did in a different way, and I'll get to that in a second. Do you study these successful teams? They had a great year, by the way. They went way farther than anyone expected. Do you look at the way the Eagles do business about cash versus cap? Howie talked about it by signing players early, the advantages of it. You save on proration and cap room. You get them. Look, you're paying them early, but you get an advantage on average per season over time because these deals outplay themselves. If you sign them early, if the guy's as good as you think he's going to be, like Mailata is due another extension. He's now outplayed his contract almost again. I just wonder because I've said this now for a number of years. I don't understand why and how he talked about it. He can't have enough defensive and offensive linemen. I don't understand it. I don't know why other teams don't do it like this. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
Stupid.
absolutely. We've been saying it for a while. Why, it is a copycat league, but it doesn't seem like teams want to copycat that strategy of just loading up on linemen before you actually think you need them. You load up on them. That's
Start front to back. A lot of teams do it middle to back to front. No, it's you protect your quarterback first of all, don't you? Like Washington, I know they went far. Their line overachieved. They're one of the least talented offensive lines in football. Why don't you start looking at Peters needs to look at that. We'll see. Because in my mock draft, I gave them a lineman. Because Brandon Coleman really should be playing guard. He's not long enough. He's not a really good left tackle. You need to protect your franchise quarterback. So to move this along here, Howie talked about it. I guess it might have been one of the games he said they were down 3 linemen, and he goes, I can't have enough linemen. He kind of talked about that. So he's right. That started really what Jeffrey Lurie and Joe Banner learned from their study with the 49ers in particular, that it starts up front with the offensive defensive lines, and they've had that mantra now for 30 years.
I'm a little surprised. I know he was asked about Bourne, but I am surprised because of the questions about his habit of signing players after 3 years who are on rookie deals, that they didn't ask him about guys like, Jordan Davis or Reed Blankenship, or I don't think I heard any specific questions on who else did we say is up for a contract? Nakobe Dean.
Dean's hurt, but yeah.
I know he's hurt, but that's a good time to get him on.
Could ask about Juergens, yeah.
And Juergens, that's the one. Thank you. That was the one I was thinking of, really.
Well, but how a lot of GMs, he talked about more Ojomo, like he expects Ojomo. It might have been Hunt. I didn't hear the other player that expects him to take the next step. And obviously, if Milt Williams walks, Ojomo's next up, number 97, to replace number 93. And then you see it at edge rush who replaces Sweat if Sweat leaves, which I think is very realistic. But yeah, it was. I thought it was this press conference on Tuesday was better than usual. But look, if the questions are good, Howie will address. There's some things he won't go into because you want to overplay your hand here. You don't want to give away exactly what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. But he gives some great insight. And he talked about this was interesting. Now, he wasn't going to deal with Myles Garrett because that guy's on another team. But he did. I forget how he went into it, but he did talk about how major moves impact other areas in terms of cash and cap. Because you have a cap. The way it works, folks, is you have a cash allocation, which is 50 times more important than cap. Cap is what you work around. But cap is important because you have to work around it. And if they were to make a major splash move, or a couple of them, where a couple of things became available, which didn't know were going to happen, but they became available. Well, you can only do so much. Like, I know the cap's going to go up, and what's interesting? Most of the GMs are not asked about the cap rise. A couple of them addressed it about knowing that they found out last week that the cap's going to be way bigger than they expected. But Monty Ossenfort, the Cardinals GM, talked about it. He goes, you don't start spending like crazy. Mm-hmm. Because that you can't build because they study this stuff. Winning in free agency does not guarantee you anything. But if you do it like Howie does it, he mixes both the draft and free agency. Now, no one does it now better than Roseman, because now he's become a Zen master at the draft, where he sure as hell wasn't, for a number of years. But now he's really good at both. And I just think that the way Howie does it, the way he mixes both, I know the old school GMs don't like free agency. I know our friend Bill Polian hated it. He's been very upfront with it. But you know what? There's two ways to skin a cat, so to speak, and Howie's really good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing that I thought was interesting, because he was asked a couple of different times and ways about playing so deeply into the season. You win the Super Bowl. How do you catch up to everything? And we know this, but obviously, and I think we talked about this on the last podcast where we talked about the real value of the combine. The scouting and personnel stuff doesn't stop. I mean, it was going on all college season. Meetings still happen. Sometimes they can be virtual. Sometimes you have the entire personnel department there. But he did mention that, and this didn't start this year. I think it started, maybe after their first Super Bowl. They have more meetings after the combine to really make sure everyone's on the same page. Everybody gets looked at. There's not going to be a player that the Eagles draft, sign, or have some interest on their board in that they are not going to have some knowledge about, like really firsthand knowledge about one way or another. And by the way, Big Dom's a big part of that process too. I've been told nobody's allowed in the building without first being able to talk to Big Dom. So he's a huge part of what they do, as if people didn't realize that already. I mean, this guy's got his own T-shirt.
I mean, yeah, he was there on Tuesday. It's funny. I always say it's extremely rare. I did find a picture of him with a suit on. I was shocked. I mean, I'm sure he rented it, but no, I'm just kidding. But it is funny. I was trying to see, did he have a Nike on? Did he have a Puma? Which one was he wearing? But he does, in his New Era hat, he does have Big Dom on the side. I did see that. I did see that. I think he might have been, I forget what color hat he was wearing, but yeah, he's, look, remember, his job is to get intel, background on players. Look, he's the best. So, oh, by the way, on your point on, he was, what he was referring to, it was an adjunct of the discussion on the knock on the Eagles about not evolving. Well, Howie talked about that, about building the roster, because he got pigeonholed, and so did Banner. Joe really started it at not paying linebackers and running backs. Now, well, they did pay our friend Brian Westbrook. They gave him a huge deal, his last deal with the Eagles. Unfortunately, he wound up getting hurt again with his knee, and then he went to the Niners to end his career. But so when they paid Barkley, they broke the mold. Like that was something that normally they would never do. And as I mentioned with Bond, like if it gets done, which is very realistic, they're gonna be paying big time money. They're gonna be paying market for Zach Bond if that gets done. So, but then they followed up with that discussion about of getting guys signed earlier, and on your point about making sure they look at every single player that's available, because you never really know. Sometimes a GM is not hinted that a player's available, and you could run with a GM on the street and go, "Hey, by the way, I don't. You and I haven't talked about this, but would you be open to having a discussion about player X? You know what? We would talk to you about that. I know we didn't talk about that before about player X, but let's talk. Let's have a drink at Starbucks. Whatever. Mm-hmm. So as you bring that up, you better be prepared if something becomes available. Particularly, by the way, you remember what happened with AJ Brown? That all went the week up to that draft. That's when it started. That's when it really pushed in 22. And then remember that the Titans told them, you have to have an agreement. We have to have an agreement in place where we're not doing this trade. You have to get a contract done with AJ Brown and his agent if you want to get this deal done. So you better know what you're doing.
Yeah. Life comes at you fast, as they say, because then you really got to get a lot of extra parties involved and get that thing done in a really timely manner. So that's basically it from Howie. That was some really good stuff. Again, he's not going to go out there and give you, the keys to the castle on everything he does. But I thought some of his answers were insightful and gave us a chance to really talk about the process for the Eagles. And if you're a fan, I think the one thing you come away with, at least if you believe what you're told, is some peace of mind that the Eagles are not behind the 8 ball in any way because they made it all the way to the Super Bowl. That it has been business as usual at the NovaCare complex and at the combine. And they are still working on some of their coaching positions to fill, which they talked about too, which parlays nicely into getting into what Nick Sirianni said at the podium. And you're right, Adam, big chip on his shoulder. We'll get into that in a second. First, you got to hear from our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
All right. Again, it's the best car buying experience out there. There's nobody else that comes close to Sky Motor Cars. You got to go in and visit them at their Westchester office, or you just got to go to SkyMotorCars.com and check out all their fantastic inventory. Tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. Remember, it's not just buying a car, whether you're trading in, whether you're just looking for their great car. Some people like to go shop for cars even if they don't need one. They just want to know what the market's like. They want to get in. Sky Motor Cars will help you. Best customer service in the industry. That is why you always see them having deals with Eagles, because they trust them just like Inside the Birds does. All right, let's move on and talk about Nick Sirianni here, Adam. And I think the biggest takeaway was when he had to talk about the tush push. So we know that the Packers put in basically, which is funny because the Packers executed 3 tush pushes against the Eagles in that first round playoff game using Tucker Kraft. He came in motion, took the snap, went forward. I mean, they had their own version of the tush push. Adam, I have been saying for years, ever since the Eagles started doing it, that, and I'm not saying I agree with banning it. I'm just saying I have felt ever since it came into prominence that this thing was eventually going to get outlawed and banned. Now, I'm not saying we're there yet. This is just right now, probably going to go to the competition committee and we'll see what happens from it. But I do think eventually it will get outlawed. They will figure out a way to use player safety because now you have guys like Frankie Louvu trying to hop over the pile. I'm sure that'll come up. But Nick Sirianni addressed all of it. And I will say this. He made a pretty strong defense to keep in my opinion, in that it's not just a random play. It is a play that he says that they coach, that it's more than just, we just line up and push the quarterback. He said that, and maybe he was exaggerating. I don't know, but he certainly went into great detail to explain how much work he does and the team does to execute that play.
Yeah, and he said, quote, I'm kind of insulted about it being an automatic play like you're referring to.
Right.
We quote, we worked so hard on that play. Yeah, some of the knock is it's too easy. And then Mark Murphy went on the Packers president and wasn't, kind of insulting, like it's not a football play. We've heard this before. Because remember, there was a point where you couldn't push. You can't pull, like Nick said, you can't pull anyone. You're not allowed to do that, but you can push. Right. For a number of years, you couldn't push, but then you can. So it's going to be interesting to see because apparently, as Mike Gill was telling me of 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey, on Tuesday on television, I'm sure ESPN was one of them and other networks, maybe Fox. It was huge discussion. Because we're in a quiet time for sports right now. It's a little quiet. So I get why this could be a bigger story. Look, if this goes to the competition committee, I'll be at the owners' meeting. So if it becomes a story, obviously we'll take up one show when we do those shows there. And this one will be in Palm Beach. If it becomes a story again at the owners' meetings, we'll discuss it. But and that would be go through the competition committee. That's when they vote on this stuff. It's just fascinating. I can tell you this from a special team standpoint. Also, it sounds like I talked to these special teams coaches while I was here. When I saw a couple guys on the street on Monday night, that sounds like the kickoff worked like they wanted to, the new kickoff rule, and also sounds like the realistically, and this will go to the competition committee, that the touchbacks will go to the 35-yard line. That's what these two special teams coaches told me in their meetings with whoever the competition committee. It sounds like a real push to get the kickoffs to go to the 35, which obviously
I hate that.
It makes it a little bit easier to go down and score a touchdown, but we'll see what happens.
And much more easier to get yourself into field goal range if you're only down 3. I mean, at that point, what do you need? 2 passes? There's 14 seconds left on the clock, and you're down 3. You get the ball at the 35. You get 2 passes. You're basically in field goal range. So
you only have to go. Let's see, 15. Hell, if it's Jake Elliott or someone who's got a strong leg. Yeah, you don't go 20 yards. You can go for 4. Well, yeah, maybe 58-yard field goal is not ideal, but yeah, you can make it. Yeah, you're right. We'll see. Nothing's official, and but there's a movement for it. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in that owners' meetings because the thing is, there's no question there's jealousy to move this along here. There's Eagles won the Super Bowl. They're really good. There's always competitive jealousy when it comes to the NFL coaches versus coaches. And although what Howie said, it was unrelated, but I forget what he was referring to about seeing coaches before the game or front office people before the game and exchanging pleasantries and asking them good luck. And he goes, or exchanging pleasantries and saying, "Hey, good luck in your game." And Howie goes, "Well, of course I want to beat them. I want them to lose, but I'm just being nice." Right.
Well, I mean, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, but I do think some of it is also optics related. I think it's not in my own opinion, I don't like the tush push. I don't think it's an aesthetically nice play to watch, especially when you get it 6 or 7 times a game. However, I would not, I'm against banning things that are not illegal. Like, I didn't like the shift in baseball, but I didn't want it banned either, because at the end of the day, it's a strategy. And I don't like banning a strategy that a team thought of because it benefited that team that isn't illegal. It's illegal now because you made it illegal in response. But I will say, though, I do think baseball is probably a little bit more fun again to watch, especially for left-handed hitters.
Yep.
So I do think, and I'm sure people are going to get mad at me. Again, I would keep the tush push, but I do think the common fan watching the game, and Eagles fans are going to get pissed at this, but it's true, probably don't like watching that play 6 or 7 times in a game. There is some aesthetic unsightliness to it. I think that's fair. Not enough to ban. Again, I wouldn't ban it, but I just don't think it's anything fun to watch.
I'm not. That doesn't matter to me as much as that. Is it a football play or not? If it's within the rules,
how is it not a football play? How can you argue it's not a football
play? I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just saying if it is, it doesn't looks like a football play to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're blocking a guy. You are pushing a guy. Now the argument is, well, wait a minute, you shouldn't be. The argument is obviously you shouldn't be allowed to push a guy in the back. Okay, but it's a block to me. It's a block.
I'll give you one other area where it might sort of be an illegal. I wonder if they'll argue this. So it becomes such a scrum. We've seen a million of these now. There are a lot of times where Jalen Hurts or the quarterback will get some extra yards because of the push, and technically, if it's a run by the running back to the outside and he's met by defenders, they blow that whistle and call it forward motion immediately. They do not call forward motion on the tush push, even when there is initial stalemate, right? So it's not necessarily regulated the same way as like an outside zone run where there's a stalemate between the running back and the linebacker, or a swarm of both, right? And they'll say forward motion, forward motion. So there is a little element of there should be forward motion called at one point, and the play's got to stop. But we've seen the Eagles sometimes get 5 or 6 yards extra on the tush push because of it. So maybe there's some argument in there that it's a football play, but it's sort of an illegal style of play because you're not blowing the whistle when ordinarily you would. I don't know. I'm sure the people who want it gone have already researched all the ways why this is not legal or not right or not good. And I'm sure, again, player safety will come into play. But I don't know how you call it not a football play, but allow, I don't know, say like a halfback option pass. Is that a football play? I mean, the running back's throwing the football. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
it's a gadget.
Right. To me, it's a football play, but I just look. People are really getting super passionate about it now. Mm-hmm. It's now got some momentum to go to the competition committee. We'll see what happens we're talking the 31st of March and the 1st and 2nd of April is when this thing will hit, and we'll see what happens. That'll be on the league's agenda, no question about it.
So does this have to get voted on twice? It gets voted on by the competition committee, and then if there's enough votes to overturn it, they go take it to the owners' meetings? Is that how it works?
Well, it gets discussed before you get there to see if it gets to a vote. Okay. And in that, if it gets to the voting part about it, we'll get, when we get closer to there, if this has got momentum we'll give you the actual rules. We'll get them from the NFL as we have certain things. You and I have contacted them. They've given us the language on certain things. Right. We'll give you the process of exactly how it'll go. So it's a little bit complicated, by the way. It's not as streamlined because the competition committee meets actually privately through Zoom a number of times throughout the year. I've actually talked to them about some of the guys who've been on the committee. It's a little bit. It's not so easy to get things passed or even to get up to a vote. It's a little harder than you think. Mm-hmm. And there are biases on a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, as I've learned throughout the years. And moving forward with the Eagles thing, there's a lot of competitive jealousy. I'm telling you, that's part of it. We're not talking. We're talking within the NFL. I don't know Mark Murphy. I just remember him as a tall safety for the the Redskins in the '80s. Mm-hmm. Who's been with the Packers for a number of years, and It's not just the Packers, by the way. There are other teams who are not happy with this. But again, of course, the Eagles are in the same conference, and you know what the Eagles did to the Packers this year. Come on.
Absolutely. All right. Last thing that Nick talked about that we'll get into, obviously, is the coaching staff. The promotion of Kevin Patullo to the offensive coordinator, said that it was his time. He sort of made it clear, or he tried to at least explain to the reporters and people watching that, even though he has never been a play caller before, he has been involved in the play calling process at times during game day, which, so is everybody. I mean, I don't know if the way it came out of his mouth, if he's trying to convince people that Kevin Patullo has some play calling experience, that doesn't count. You got to do a whole game. But you know how Nick is. He likes to over-explain things and sort of talk himself in one direction or the other.
He was good. He did. And by the way, just one more thing. So because they have not named the quarterback's coach or the assistant O-line coach yet, that's why the Eagles they really like to wait. They like to wait till they're all filled. Not that I don't remember this. This actually happened to the Eagles. I can't remember. The guy was a defensive coach. It had been reported that they were on Nick's staff, that they had hired this coach. Remember the guy backed out of the deal?
Yes, he was like an assistant cornerbacks coach. I think he was going to be.
Okay, right. I'm sure this is part of it, because I think you and I on Nick's staff, we put some stuff out there, and they all turned out to be hired. They actually wound up being on the staff, and then we were not aware of this guy, and it might have Bruce Feldman might have reported it. So I know it wasn't a normal. It was someone from the college ranks. So anyway,
yeah, and I want to say Houston. I want to say like he was coaching at the University of Houston, or either left to go to the University of Houston.
Right. Well, this guy had left a number. He'd been with a number of college teams. So I just remember thinking, oh gosh, this is not a surprise at all, because look at how many teams this guy had left, and the amount of look at the short times he would spend with each team. Now it's starting to make more sense. Where hey, someone got to him before he signed the contract, so that's. Yeah, I don't blame a team for doing that. And then he did confirm the Parks Frazier, but he didn't want to talk about that yet because they've announced the staff.
Right.
So Parks Frazier is the guy. He did talk about, hey, it's a guy I knew from the Colts, and he's an up-and-coming coach.
Yes, and a guy who actually has called plays, because he was the interim offensive coordinator for Jeff Saturday. He's actually, if we're being fair, he's got more play calling experience than Kevin Patullo does.
He does, sure. And they didn't. The one thing I would have liked them, and I don't know how Nick would address this, because it's not easy to address, but what kind of scheme are you going to run? I mean, we still think it's going to be more or less the one they had last season with Kellen Moore, but Parks Frazier has no experience in Kellen Moore's system. And obviously Patullo did last season, where he was involved, and Nick does because he was an overseer, though he wasn't doing it day to day. So we'll see what happens with that.
All right, great stuff. So that's Nick Sirianni. Howie Roseman, the executive vice president of football operations. That's what they said. There's still a lot of days left at the combine. We're not done with Inside the Birds. We're going to have a couple more this week before this thing wraps up. But that's going to do it for this episode of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the Birds. Be sure to check out our friends at PHLSportsNation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at PHLSportsNation.com and on Twitter at PHLSportsNation.